Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This week's video, we're going to talk about close range handgun accuracy for reflex optics. Over the past decade, and really just the past 5 years, we've seen an explosion in reflex optics for handguns. Most notably the RMR by Trijicon, my personal choice. I think it's one of the most durable reflex sight optics out there. But basically what we're talking about, if you're not familiar, is putting a reflex optic on a handgun. Pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages. It started out as a competition thing. In fact, you saw it in competition shooting long before you saw it in any kind of duty or carry options. The sights were just too big, or they were just viewed as something that was acceptable for competition but not for real world hardcore battlefield use. Quote unquote. The durability's increased, and so has the accessibility. Prices have come down a little bit, and then there's just so many people out there offering the option to mill a gun or aftermarket parts. Raven Concealment offers one, of course. There's the ALG mount. There's some other options out there that you can put a reflex sight optic on your handgun. So we've gone from competition to carry curiosity to some people, myself included, use it on their everyday carry gun because there's some very distinct advantages to it. But one of the things the shooting community loves is appreciable metrics. So we love shot timers. Some people worship at the altar of the shot timer, and then some people use the shot timer to measure certain metrics under certain conditions. Regardless of what your goal is with a shot timer, it does allow you to appreciate speed and accuracy. You look at the speed, then you look at how well you shot. So someone can be shooting iron sights their entire life, pick up a red dot, shoot a target at 3 meters and be like, man, I'm so much faster in iron sights. Well, there's a learning curve there, but there's also some other issues. So I wanted to put this video together to just talk about how I teach reflex sight use on handguns and identify if you are slow or if you are slower on a reflex sight than you are a handgun, why that is or how you can go about fixing it. First things first, we're not going to get into this video without talking about the science behind it. Why are reflex sights advantageous over iron sights? It's really the same principle as why red dot optics on rifles are advantageous. We're eliminating the number of focal planes we need to shoot bad guys. If you think about iron sights, be they handgun or rifle, what we're talking about is a rear focal plane, a front focal plane. So we got 2 focal planes there, and we have a third focal plane, which is the threat. And then there could be other distances in between that you have to deal with depending on the situation. But just for the sake of shooting bad guys or the sake of shooting targets, we have 3 focal planes that we have to reconcile in order to deliver accurate gunfire. I have to at some point align these 2 focal planes, and then I have to assess my third focal plane and then come back to this focal plane. So my eyes are going to be reaccommodating back and forth between these 3 focal planes in order to break shots. If you've been shooting for a long time, your eyes are already subconsciously competent in doing this. When you pick up a red dot for the first time, if you haven't been taught the correct way to use it, you'll probably focus on the dot and put the dot over your target, which means your dot becomes your front sight. You'll focus on the dot instead of the threat. When in reality, the way we're supposed to use red dot sights is we focus on the threat and we superimpose the dot where we want to hit. Why is that important? Well, that's one focal plane shooting. If you look at the research into the sympathetic nervous system and how people react under stress, it is far more likely to focus on the threat, and we have to hard focus back to our sights versus just automatically picking up those sights like we've trained to do, because our body is just wired to focus on the bad guy. That's how we've evolved. We've been fighting without guns far longer than guns have existed. So those sights, while they're super helpful and we want to use them, and our end goal needs to be to get that sight alignment to deliver accurate, knowledgeable fire, sometimes the body just works against us. And it may be for a fraction of a second, and it may be for an entire engagement. I've talked to people in real life shootings, myself included. Sometimes you see your sights, sometimes you don't, dependent on the situation, dependent on your experience level and how much stress inoculation training you've had. I'll have students who've gone through one simunitions course, they didn't see their sights the entire class. But then I'll have somebody who's a regular student, this is their 7th or 8th or 9th revolution through a training cycle, and they're like, yeah, I'm seeing them. I'm seeing them more. I'm seeing them more. Not every single time based on context, situation, how the threat presents, things of that nature, but they're like, yeah, the sights are there. So the red dot, the reflex sight, be it on rifle or handgun, allows us to use to go with what our eye naturally wants to do, which is to hard focus on the threat. And from a self-defense point of view, it makes more sense to focus on the threat if we have a sighting system that allows us to do that, because then we're constantly getting data on the bad guy. He's not a blurry shape in the background. And if at any time he stops being a threat, we may realize that sooner because we're looking at him versus the trying to align a front sight with a rear sight, get our sight picture, and break shots with iron sights. So the advantages to using a red dot, pretty self-apparent. We use one focal plane to engage our threat versus 3 or 4. And that is going to aid us in more accurate gunfire. And it's going to aid us if once we get there and once we practice it and train it correctly, we should be able to be just marginally faster because we're only dealing with one focal plane versus 3. Now, how fast is faster? Shot Timer is going to tell you the tail once you get there. If you want to measure it in that way. I think the most important thing is to just think about just this common sense of it. Well, I'm doing less. Now, I may only gain 1/100th of a second, but 1/100th of a second is 1/100th of a second. If I can get 1/100th of a second head start in anything, I'm going to take it because an advantage is an advantage. And that's an appreciable advantage you'll be able to measure for yourself if you're just getting into RDS, if you're just getting into using reflex sights on handguns, or it's just something that you've just kind of been playing with, or you're seriously considering it as a carry option. But for those of you who already have reflex sights and you're frustrated, maybe the issue isn't so much with it's actually slower as you could potentially be practicing it the wrong way. As an instructor, there's something I observe consistently with handgun training. And it occurs at all levels. You can see somebody who's very high functioning making this mistake, and you can see usually it's beginners. But basically what I'm talking about is a procedural error. So the student or the shooter comes out of the holster. No matter what their draw technique is, their ultimate goal is going to be full presentation, aim, sighted fire. So they're going to have to, reconcile sight alignment, look at the threat, come back to the front sight, break shots. Right when they get to about here, their eyes go down and they pick up that rear sight because they're creating a shortcut, a heuristic. Not a bad thing for what we're about to do. I've just picked up the rear sight. Now I've taken my eyes off my threat. That could potentially be an issue, but it's going to occur in a very short period of time, maybe 1/100th of a second. And as the gun presses fully out, that's when they channel it through to that front sight, go to the threat, and then come back to the front sight, break the shot. Is that a bad thing? It is a procedural debate. I won't say that that's bad. It's not correct. We want to bring the sights to our eyes. However, the human body loves to create shortcuts. We are lazy by nature. We love to do things in the easiest way possible. It's not a bad thing. It's conserving energy. And if you know the laws of thermodynamics, energy is always conserved. So if I hear a noise behind me, I don't turn all the way around generally unless I'm a jumpy person or the noise startles me. What I generally do is just turn my head, decide if it needs my full attention, turn my body. This is no different. Eyes down, pick up rear sight, gun presses out, get my alignment, threat, back to front sight, bang, 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 bang if necessary. Not necessarily a bad thing. However, think about this. If you've been shooting that way your whole life, could that complicate your ability to pick up a reflex sight, an RDS window? One of the most common things I hear from shooters is the window's too small, or I have to fish for the dot, I've got to swim for the dot. Part of that problem is maybe the way your sights are set up, and the other part of it is you're trying to use an RDS, potentially, the same way that you're using iron sights. Now, the traditional RDS setup is rear sight, optic, front sight, suppressor height, just in case your optic goes down, you still have a sighting system. If you're one of those people that looks down to pick up your rear sights, be it here, 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 if you're hardwired to pick up the rear sight first, and you pick up the rear sight and then wash through, your body's trying to establish traditional sight alignment. It's ignoring the fact that the RDS is there, and then you've got to kind of remember in some way, like, oh, hey, there's a red dot optic here, I can use that. The other issue, of course, is people are looking at the dot as opposed to looking at the threat, so that's slowing down their shot time. That's one of the potential issues that I see as an instructor when people get into the red dot sights. But again, we don't want to get wrapped around the axle because you're probably already pretty proficient with your optic or with your sights, right? So you've been shooting handgun for, let's say, a decade. You're not going to get as proficient with a reflex sight in 1,000 rounds. You have a decade of experience on iron sights. You've used those iron sights in multiple different situations, multiple lighting conditions, multiple physical conditions, multiple positions, shooting positions, multiple guns, multiple types of ammunition against multiple targets. 1,000 rounds on an RDS is just not going to get you there. But the learning curve is going to be so much shorter, especially if you've got a lot of experience using red dots on a rifle, once you start using it correctly or you refine the way that you're doing it. But is it slower? Is it remarkably slower to engage a threat with a red dot sight at close distances than it is with iron sights? Well, common sense tells us no, but let's take a look at why some people are experiencing the problem with it actually being slower for them. Now, when people talk about the reflex sight being closer at distance, I think that's a very personal issue, but I'm just going to choose a random distance. How far away am I from this threat? I don't know, probably between 3 and 5 meters. I'm not going to bright line distance it because, I'm just not capable of that. But I do know how far I am once I get my gun sights up. Once I actually bring the weapon out and present, the RMR tells me I'm roughly 3 to 5 meters away from my threat, based on the size of the RMR body in relation to either the head or the shoulders of my bad guy. Now, when I engage, what I'm going to do differently is just go along with human nature. I'm going to stare at where I want to hit. I'm going to burn a hole in my desired point of impact. I'm going to complete my draw stroke, press out, and if I'm doing everything correctly as far as hand-eye coordination goes, my red dot should appear over roughly where I want to shoot. Now, the further I am away, the more I might have to fine-tune it, but at this distance, if I'm aiming for that high thoracic cavity, I'm looking at it, I'm burning a hole in it, the gun's going to come out, I'm going to press, that dot should roughly be where I want it to be. If my point of aim is the head, it should be roughly where I want it to be. I may have to fine tune based on time, context, situation. Obviously, if I don't have reaction time available, I may have to just go with what I get. But it should still be faster than iron sights once I do it correctly. So the trick, really the only trick to this, especially for those if you find yourself swimming and looking for the sight, is to look exactly where you want to hit and do not break eye contact as the gun comes into your field of view. Trust your hand-eye coordination. You've been dealing with hand-eye coordination your entire life. Your body's already kind of built to do that. That's why we can catch thrown objects and we don't have to think about the math involved. We don't have to factor speed, arc, epigee, anything like that. We just put our hand out and we usually, if we don't catch it, we're damn close. This is nothing different. In fact, this should be easier because all we're doing is get an optical alignment with our hands. Our proprioception and everything, our Hebbian plasticity, and you want to go into the whole science behind that, our kinesthetics, if you will. We're just going to look, we're going to draw, the dot should appear roughly where we want to hit, and we're going to shoot. So as I come out, I'm burning a hole where I want to look, gun comes up, boom. Now, that was kind of at a half speed. It wasn't very fast. Can I do that faster? Well, let's find out. So I'm going to go ahead and use my shot timer here. Get that going. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. So what we have is consistent, repeatable accuracy using that technique. It's not a magic trick. I'm looking where I want to hit. The gun's clearing the holster on the tone or whatever my cue is to shoot, or maybe I'm just giving myself a mental cue. I'm pressing out. My hand-eye coordination, that kinesthetics, that Hebbian plasticity, that natural ability for our eyes and hands to work subconsciously together is going to roughly put that dot where I want it to be, and I'm going to break the shot. Hand-eye coordination plays a huge part in shooting, more so than some people would be willing to admit, especially at these distances in which sights are advantageous, but sight picture gives us such a small view of the threat because we're so close to them. That's another great advantage of the red dot system using a reflex sight, is it allows us to look at the bad guy as opposed to looking at these sights. the eye accommodates far more, refocuses far more close up than it does further away. Very little accommodation occurs the further you get away from your bad guy or whatever your point of interest is. The closer we are, the more, I guess you could say, extreme that refocusing is, and the more blurry our bad guy is going to be in reference to our sight picture. So being able to focus on the threat, huge advantage. Now, when you practice this on your own, the biggest thing to remember is just to focus on the threat, focus on the threat, focus on the threat, focus on the threat. Some people's concerns might be, well, if I shoot and I practice that way and then I go back to red dot sights, or I go back to iron sights rather, am I going to have to relearn the iron sights? The answer to that is pretty much no. It really is like riding a bike. Your brain is more than capable of handling two complex procedures that somewhat conflict with each other separately. You're going to know which gun you have. Now, of course, if you're going to swap guns, the question would be, why are you carrying iron sights one day and a red dot sight the next? You should really stick with one system or the other. If you're not comfortable carrying yet with the reflex sights, obviously you're going to carry with the iron sights, and that's fine. But once you get to that point of comfortability, stick with one system. Go back to the other one for practice or for range use or for what have you. But the idea, on the handgun at least, I would say that you're going to lose your iron sights ability is kind of a fallacy, because, and just off my own personal skill level and other instructors and other shooters that I know who use red dot sights, reflex sights for carry and for competition, what have you, is to use a cliche, it is like riding a bike. You're not going to forget how to do it. Now, like it or not, eye-hand coordination is a very advantageous skill to use with firearms. As you can see, this gun has no sights. There's none. Now, I'm not very far away, but I was able to deliver accurate gunfire from first to last round. How was I able to do that? Well, the answer is pretty evident. It's eye-hand coordination. It's not a magic trick. It's simply me using my natural ability to know where my hands are in relation to my eyes and being able to deliver accurate gunfire with proper recoil control and the fundamentals of the firearms. The only fundamental I've removed is the use of sights. Now, is this something I recommend? Should you take the sights off your carry gun? Absolutely not. That is not something you should do. But you need to understand that your body has this natural ability. The trick is to get it to work in concert with either your iron sights, or in the case of this video, what we're talking about, your reflex sight. How repeatable is this skill set going to be based on the situation? Is this skill going to aid you in shooting? Well, it can if you embrace it. We in the shooting community sometimes get wrapped around the axle about certain things because we need something to talk about, let's be honest. But this is one of those things that some people just completely ignore exists, and some people take it to a level of this is the only way that you can shoot, and they're both wrong. We need to meet in the middle. We need to use every physiological advantage we have to be able to shoot the gun more accurately, and as importantly, factoring, be able to shoot the gun faster, get more rounds on target faster. Eye-hand coordination is a very real thing. Now, distance increases, it becomes more and more difficult. But if my hand-eye coordination is already demonstrated, I'm able to get the dot roughly where I want it to be. As ranges increase, or ranges decrease I should say, hand-eye coordination may give me my first round on target, and then I may find the dot. Is that an acceptable way to shoot? No, it's not. But you need to know that the ability exists, and you have to, as Luke did, he trusted the Force, man. He put that missile right down that exhaust pipe. I hate to use a Star Wars reference, but it just popped into my head. You have to trust your ability, your natural ability, to exceed a standard in the event that the conditions do not present the way that you want them to. Self-defense shooting is not range shooting. Shot timers are not going to be there. Now, a gunfight is a competition. Don't get me wrong, there is some appreciable metrics that are going to be there, but there's so many variables that you can't measure A and say, okay, well, this gunfight's going to be just like that gunfight. It's impossible. Something I talk about all the time. I'm going to continue to talk about it because it's a very salient point. We have to understand that the shooting ability is going to be commensurate on how much work we put into it. So if I ignore the fact that my hand-eye coordination exists, if I ignore the fact that I can get repeatable results without sights, then I am kind of handicapping myself in my ability to develop a skill set with that red dot sight, that cool sight system that I want to use, that advantageous sight system that I want to use. we want the dot. But if I'm already looking where I want to hit, that's the way I'm training with the reflex sight, then you should embrace your natural ability to work hand-eye coordination into your shooting. We do not want to rely on hand-eye coordinated shooting. The reason for that is we want knowledgeable information on where our sights are going to go, and our sights are going to give us that information, be it our red dot optic or our iron sights. But hand-eye coordination, and I underscore this, aids in accurate gunfire because our hands are going to put the sights roughly where we want to be. They've already been doing it for as long as you've been shooting with your iron sights. When the gun presents, think about in your house, a light switch out of the corner of your eye. You see it just out of the corner of your eye. Look at it, look back, point, look back to your hand. Your spatial awareness, your Hebbian plasticity, your proprioception, all these things are going to work together and tell you, like, okay, roughly this is where our arm needs to be. It's not a magic trick, it's just your body's natural ability to interact with a three-dimensional environment. So when it comes to shooting, we can rely on that, and that aids us, it augments our ability to shoot with a point of aim. So be it iron sights, that sight picture sight alignment, or in the case of a reflex sight, superimposing the dot over where we're looking. You should not rely on point shooting. I don't agree with point shooting. I believe point shooting is a thing. But I do teach unsighted fire, hand-eye coordination assisted shooting, something like that. It's not something I'm going to rely on because, like I said, the camps need to meet somewhere in the middle. The people who say sight, 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 sights need to accept the fact that hand-eye coordination exists, and the people who say hand-eye coordination is all you're going to be able to use in a gunfight need to accept the fact that sights exist, and they need to be your ultimate goal regardless of context of the situation. If I'm shooting from retention, I can't use my sights. But once I get distance, I need to get on those sights as soon as I can because they're the only thing that are going to guarantee point of aim, point of impact based on fundamentals on the gun. Are there other methods that you can use to shoot with the reflex sight until that speed comes and until you stop fishing for the dot? Well, one of the ways you can stop fishing for the dot is get a bigger dot. The 3.5 is popular. I don't like the 3.5. Again, this is my personal opinion. The reason I like the 3.5 is because it's too damn small. We're talking about a handgun. The 3.5 dot is cool if you want to impress your friends and shoot steel at 200 meters with a handgun. It's not so cool when we think about close distance shooting. The dot is too small. Again, my opinion, going to underscore that. The reason being, front sight's not that thin, the front sight's not that short. I like the 6.5. Again, third time, personal opinion, reason being the 6.5 dot is roughly the same size as a front sight post. We're talking about a handgun. This thing, for me, is not all about magic tricks, it's about accurate self-defense shooting. So the 6.5 is perfect for what I want to do. Anything bigger than that would still work, but it would remove the ability of fine-tuning for those longer distance shots. So 6.5 for me is a sweet spot. Another thing I do is I put my rear sight forward of the RMR so it's out of the way unless I need it. Yes, it does reduce sight radius. However, I already did a video on this, so if you want to see if that actually affects the gun in any meaningful way, you can check that video out. Any other methods I can use? There's one method out there called, I've heard it called a couple different things, but guillotine method is the one I keep hearing it as. And basically that's where we use the body of the RMR as our point of aim, as our front sight post, so to speak, or a ghost ring on our threat. So if I'm close enough, the RMR fills up the head, I shoot. A little further back, I use the owl ears to kind of bracket the neck, and that'll give me a high thoracic hit. I don't like that method at all, and the reason being, it's a crutch. It is taking you away from what you should be practicing to do in the first place. Now, if for some reason you don't get your dot when you present, take the time, slow it down, fine-tune it. Rely on your eye-hand coordination to put the dot roughly where it needs to be every single time. There's no reason at any distance that the dot won't align. And in fact, the further back you get, the easier it should be. Hand-eye coordination is a thing. Accept it, live it, love it, get to know it, and embrace it, especially when it comes to this platform. Look where you want to hit, present the gun, dot's going to fall into place, break the shot. No magic tricks. I understand the cost of a red dot sight it's cost prohibitive. You got to get a gun, you got to mill the slide, you got to buy the RMR, which is sometimes almost as expensive as the firearm. And then you've got to spend the ammunition to train it. But if you already have it, or if you're considering buying it, have faith. The system is extremely advantageous to iron sights. Now, we still want to leave iron sights on our gun for the same reason we still leave backup sights on our rifle. having two sighting systems in case one goes down is awesome. That's a behavior you should never get out of, regardless of platform. But me personally, I'm a 100% believer. For a long time, I kind of went back and forth because I had to put the time in. Now that I have the time in on the system, my duty gun, which is this Agency Arms Field right here, this is my actual law enforcement duty gun, and my personal carry gun, which is this gun in the 19 size, my Field Edition 19. I carry those. Those are my everyday carries, be it duty when I do my reserve time as a law enforcement officer, or when I do, when I'm just going out about the world. I carry a red dot sight, a reflex sight handgun, because I 100% believe in the system. I think it's advantageous, and I think the cons are a training issue, not a realistic issue. What are some realistic cons of a red dot sight? Well, it's got a battery, so it could die. Trijicon makes a dual illumination model, but they wash out on their light, so I don't recommend them. Another con is that the system you're getting a lot of reciprocation, and it could cause problems with those electronics, and your sight could go down. That's why we leave the iron sights on the gun. You might have to send it in and get a new one replaced, but that's after thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds in most cases. I've had one go down right around 8,000 rounds, sent it in, they sent me a new one back, no big deal. Obviously the issue there would be, well, my gun is at its commission until I get my red dot sight back, and that is one potential con of this system, so it's something to think about. But your carry gun, functional sighting system, you shouldn't, if you can afford it, you should have a secondary training system. If you can't afford it, then that is one definite con and one definite thing that may cause you to hesitate from investing in a reflex sight. And I would completely understand that, because money's money, and you only got what you got, and of course people have to budget, families and things like that. So that is one con. But there is no con in the shooting. There isn't. There just isn't. All it is how you're training it, and if you're training it and practicing it correctly. Because if you're not practicing it correctly, you're going to keep having those same problems, those same excuses are going to manifest, and you're going to be saying, well, I'm just going to keep using iron sights. These are the same arguments we heard when red dot sights on rifles became more and more prevalent. There's still some of those old crusty guys out there who love their iron sights no matter what. They swear to God they're faster on them. They never put in the time on the optic. Now as they get older and their eyes start to go, because that's just human nature, they start to embrace the sight a little bit more, and eventually, hopefully, they join the team and realize that it's not about gear and being cool as it is providing a measurable and articulable advantage to self-defense shooting, be it a red dot sight on a handgun or a red dot sight on a rifle. But as far as the thing I see quite frequently, the reason I made this video, are red dot sights slower up front? No, they're not. The way you practice it is going to determine how fast you are. So my advice to you in practice is learn to get your hand-eye coordination and your natural ability to aim or to look where you want to hit. Get those two things to work together to refine your ability to pick up that speed. And I think you'll find within a very small round count that you increase your proficiency and you realize, hey, this is faster than iron sights, and I'm going to stick with it. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly. Not bad for a gun with no sights.